But it's like... Quit the flip. Don't come at the master skaters. We don't dip with kickflips and whack tricks. Word.
I thought tricks were the whole point of skating.
You'll have a far more flexible schedule.
A more flexible schedule? How many hours will I even have with these contracts?
Are you really going to complain about having a good, well-paying job?
I just don't...
Especially at a time when we need to remain competitive. So we all keep our jobs.
Mr. McKee, I just
No,
need a contract.
John.
Shove her in the back of the truck. It's show time.
Oh, no, please. Not again.
Hey, Jack. Coming in. Such a good club.
Da, este un tânăr care anul trecut în februarie a avut un accident, a murit în accident și în acest an lucrez pentru crucea lui.
You'd find yourself just sitting in the park as the lights come up.
Who's going to get us a beer then?
Usually it was me, but I didn't mind. Bit by bit we'd come to and begin the day, anticipating what new battles we had to fight. Within about 45 minutes of waking up, we'd be laughing. Because that's all we can do.
Introducing Flowtech, a revolutionary tripod technology from Sackler and Vinton that promises to transform the way camera operators work. Flowtech is the quickest tripod to deploy in the world, and the unique quick-release brakes located at the top allow you to set up and adjust your tripod in an instant, all from the comfort of a standing position. The revolutionary profile of the carbon fibre legs and magnetic blocks at the base make it easy and comfortable to transport, whatever your location. The wider leg profile also provides exceptional torsional stiffness, ensuring that the tripod won't twist during camera panning movement. Flowtech is also the most versatile tripod we've ever designed. It can be extended as high as 157 centimeters, but also as low as just 26 centimeters, thanks to a unique hinge lock mechanism and easy to remove spreader. You could say it's the only tripod you'll ever need. We've thought of every single design detail, combining the speed and portability of Sackler with the torsional rigidity of Vinton, and creating the easiest to use and most versatile tripod on the planet. We've even made sure you no longer have to struggle to snap the feet on and off. This revolutionary design has been tested to destruction in the most extreme environments, from the cold Arctic, out mountains, to the beach and sea. It's even gone through our most extensive testing program ever conceived to ensure this is the most reliable tripod you'll ever own. Flowtech, evolving tripod technology.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. We are Smith and Finnegan. And now, for our final trick, we require 1, of you.
But it's like, quit the flip. Don't come at the master skaters. We don't dip with kick flips and whack tricks. Word.
I thought tricks were the whole point of skating.
You'll have a far more flexible
A
schedule.
more flexible schedule. How many hours will I even have with these contracts?
Are you really going to complain about having a good, well-paying job?
I just don't...
Especially at a time when we need to remain competitive. So we all keep our jobs.
Mr. McKee, I just
No.
need a contract.
John.
Shove her in the back of the truck. It's showtime.
Oh, no, please. Not again.
Hello and welcome to today's GTC Roundtable. My name's Ian Mann. I will be hosting today's roundtable. I'm a DOP and freelancer. Today's roundtable will be about how to be a freelancer. So hopefully we'll be able to give you some good insight and information on that. To be honest, I haven't actually worked out myself yet, so I might learn something today as well. We've got some fantastic guests coming up who'll be able to give us the insights of their part of the industry and the jobs that they do. We will have Jonathan Constantanu, who is a DOP like myself. We'll also have Matt Pothecary, who is a producer-director, and Rob Rinder, just to name some of our earlier guests, and then we'll be followed by some other guests later on. So this has been produced by the GTC, who is originally was designed for cameramen in the TV world, but now work with all people of all disciplines throughout the TV industry. We try and support people and help people, and basically our membership is as far wide as cameramen all the way down to runners. So we try and have a strong support network for everyone involved. I myself have been a freelance cameraman for about 20 years. And I found that the GTC has always helped me when I've needed them and been able to give me good advice in terms of running a business, setting up a business and things like that. So when they asked me to host this particular roundtable, I was more than happy to do that and wanted to be involved. So I hope that you'll find it useful and you'll get some good insight from the people we're going to speak to today. I don't know really what I can say about being a freelancer that will help you at this point in terms of, I would say that maybe you just kind of have to have a very strong plan about how you're going to approach it and feel like you have the ability to sort of be flexible and be able to sort of go from one thing to the next and be able to handle that. And that's one of the core principles of being a freelancer, really, is being ready for anything. So hopefully you'll find, by speaking to some of our guests, you'll be able to work that out and get some good insights on that. So I'd like to introduce our first guest, which is Jonathan Constantanu, who's also a DOP, who works mainly with very macro photography only, but I'm sure he'll be able to fill us in on that and let us know what he does for a living. So, John, how are you today?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. I'll overlap there.
There's a bit of a delay, but yes, I do. I've got experience in commercial and documentary. I'm now a DOP, and I have a unique set of experiences, particularly experience in macro diamond jewelry photography, but also in hospitality, travel, commercial, and even broadcast documentary. So quite a uniquely wide range of experience, and I can't explain how I got there, but I'm here today.
Well, we're very lucky to have you still with such a width and breadth of experience. And it'd be great for you to maybe tell us sort of your first forays into the freelance world. I think a lot of our listeners would be interested to hear that in terms of how you went from maybe a sort of student or someone who wanted to get into the media into sort of your first steps into sort of setting up your own business and getting that coveted work that you wanted.
Yeah, sure. So I didn't have a what I would call a typical route into the industry. Perhaps there is no such thing as a typical route, but I wasn't born down the road. And it was only at the age of about 21, 22 that I discovered film and camera work and realized that's what I needed to do. I was actually headed towards a career in business and politics. And anyways, through a discovery. And I remember being at the age of 22. Right now, you think, oh, well, of course you can change your life direction at 22. You're, barely an adult. But when that's all you've been doing, you think, oh, I've headed all this way, all my life, all my education in this direction. Then I've discovered it, at least for people in my situation. Is it possible to make this change? And I would say absolutely, because once you've, the genie's out of the bottle, you'll never want to go through life wondering what if. So I then went to film school and retrained, and then I was very lucky in that I got what I would class as the dream job for someone who's starting out in an industry with a diamond jewelry company, which I still have a very strong relationship with today. And they trained me, they invested in me, they sent me to courses in Antwerp to become gemologically trained, and gave me an insight into diamond jewelry photography that very few other people would have. And this kind of feeds into starting off as a freelancer. The only reason I got that job, I found out years later, once I knew the director of the company, was because they put an ad out on what used to be Film and TV Pro, which I think is now just part of Mandy.com. And it was on a few other places, looking for a videographer and photographer. And I just fresh out of film school, no contacts, no nothing. And I did my research and deduced where they would roughly be and what the name of the company was, because it wasn't listed in the ad. And I was pretty sure by the end of it that it was going to be this one. And so I rang them up and just said, I'd like to talk to the director about this job opening. And we had a really good conversation, and I got an interview in person and went from there. And he said he had over 300 applications, and I was the only one that gave him a phone call. And so one of the top tips I give to someone is never just knock on the front door, always find another way around or another way in, because that's the only way you're going to have that human connection to advance yourself. And when you do that, it's very difficult for them to not give you an interview. It won't get you the job, but it will get you the interview. And if you're good, that'll be enough.
So I suppose you're kind of saying that it's important to sort of bring your character to any sort of interaction you have with a possible employer and people you'll come to meet along the way on your journey. Did you find that helpful for you? Was that a key thing that you needed, that sort of interaction with the person you were going to be working with?
Yes, absolutely. You need to bring yourself to the table, and ultimately, just like any industry, this is not just unique to our industry. It's about relationships and getting on with people. And as much as your skill is important and your experience is important, you've got to be able to understand what people want and solve their problems for them, and not be difficult to get along with. And you'll make great friendships and relationships along the way. So yeah, I can't encourage it more. Get out there and have random encounters, bump into people, and you will make the connections that you need to make just through proximity.
So on your journey in the industry, would you say that's something you might even have to work on as in your sort of freelance development, and that is how you interact with people, how you are on set, how you communicate with people just in downtime and normal times rather than just when you're working?
Yes, absolutely. And I've learned many lessons, and I'm sure there's many more that I'm going to learn. But one of the things I keenly remember is you leave film school and you believe the world is your oyster, because you've gone to film school and you've trained in cinematography, and you've got a couple of credits on a short film as the DOP, and so you are God's gift to cinematography, and you know how things should be done. And of course, in hindsight, you realize obviously that's not the way it's done. And because of the width of experience I've had in different sectors, operating at a high level in each of these sectors, things look very different, and you need to know what you're worth and how you solve people's problems for them in a way that is organic to you, but also how to pitch yourself and be flexible within each of these different remits. Just because you shot a TV broadcast commercial that you got your APA rate, and you're very happy with that, and you know you're working this many hours and you're earning this much with this kit fee associated with it. If you walk onto an independent short film set and you expect things to work in the same way, you're going to get a rude awakening. And it's all about knowing what value you're offering to people, but also what value you're getting. And it may not be financial value. Sometimes it's an investment in other things, in long-term relationships or in other experiences. So yeah, you really need to understand just how wide an industry we now have due to digital democratization. And you essentially are kind of an actor behind the camera, and there's different parts to play for different roles in different parts of the industry.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that. I mean, do you think there's some nepotism has a form to play in that fact? I mean, we've talked about how you would necessarily kind of need to be a good person on set and off set and friendly so that you can get those opportunities. And I mean, I think in my career, I feel like I've worked with a lot of people I was friends with first. Obviously, I met them on the job per se, but then once we built that kind of connection of a bond, then we went on to work further. So that was a kind of nepotism. But obviously, I think a lot of people who'd be listening to our chat would be wondering, do I need to know someone in the industry already to get in the industry? Or can you sort of build your network from the people you meet while you're already in?
I think there's this term nepotism, and it exists in our industry as well as many others. But it always has this negative connotation, and when it's done poorly and for the wrong reasons, it really is bad. I don't like it. But you also got to understand human nature, and it's very easy for a producer or a production coordinator, whoever is hiring people, if they know you directly, or at least if they know someone who knows you, and your name gets put across their table, because then the conversation's pretty much over. They're no longer looking for reasons to hire you. They're looking for any reasons that they shouldn't hire you, because they trust this person who trusts you. Their problems have been solved because the trust is in the relationships with either you or the person that's referred you. So it's a bit of a shortcut, and that's why it's so difficult. The most difficult part of being a freelancer is starting out. There are many other challenges that you'll encounter later on, but that's the biggest challenge. And ultimately, yes, I think if you don't have any contact when you're starting out, it's going to be a rough ride, and that's why you do all these different things for all these different reasons, not just financial reward. And from those, a few of them will, grow and germinate, and you'll be able to use those connections as well as connections referred from those, and then you'll start getting on your way. Once you start doing that, it becomes easier.
Well, I think this is a good time for me to mention, thank you for that, John. It's a good time for me to mention the Q&A box at the bottom. You might see there's a little thing moving along, ask a question, and that means we would love you to ask us any questions. So if you have any questions for myself or for John about our journey in the industry, or anything we can help you with, please go ahead and just box and send us a message, and we'll try and answer all those questions before the chat is done. So, John, I'd like to sort of move on. I hope you don't mind me calling you John. I shorten everything, just colloquial Londoner. But have you got any sort of advice for people who are sort of thinking about entering an industry as a freelancer? Maybe not necessarily a camera professional, but possibly someone who works in another part or another department of the media industry, or even in the law, or any sort of freelance approach to business.
Yeah, I actually I did a bit of prep work for this, and I've come up with my 5 top tips, at least from my perspective, for someone who's starting out. This is not targeted at people that are already sort of on their way. This is people who are thinking of starting out or have just about started. And so I'll sort of run through them, and then if any of them pique your fancy, then just ask me afterwards. So my number 1 would be, know your worth and be the person you would hire in the shoes of the other person. Number 2 was something I've already said, is never knock on the front door, or never just knock on the front door, always find another way around. Number 3, understand image copyright law. It's a really boring and plain one, but it's so important. And we'll come on to that later. Number 4, leading on to that, get yourself a contract system in place. If you're not working with people that are insisting you sign their contracts and have terms agreed, then you need to sort yourself out and have contracts that you operate on. And when you're just starting out, lower level work, you're going to be the one mixing with others. That's what I advise. And number 5 would be, having said all of that, be flexible. So there's knowing your worth, having contracts and terms, it's great, but those are just something to shield you with and protect yourself. But you don't have to enforce them or every bit of it all the time. Be flexible and use all of this knowledge to your advantage.
Well, that's really helpful. There's some really good tips there, actually. Some good advice, especially the image right thing. It's not really something I would have personally thought about, but I suppose it's something you do need to think about in terms of, if you're going to be a camera professional, at least you have to think about who holds the rights to your business, or how that image is going to be used further on down the line. In terms of sort of the skills you need to sort of get to the sort of freelance point of where you can say you run your own business and you are a freelancer, you're a self-contained business, do you have any sort of tips for that? Any skills you think someone might need?
And tips in terms of how to transition from an individual into starting a business? I didn't hear that.
Well, no, not really. I mean, I approach it as the thought that as soon as you become a freelancer, in effect, you are your own business, because you have to know where all the incomings and outgoings are and so on and so forth. So really just tips of how not to be daunted about that sort of step, where instead of knowing that you have a PAYE job, for example, where you go to work, the person handles all the business side of things, i.e. your tax or the accounting, and then at the end of the month you get your paycheck. Obviously, as a freelancer, that doesn't really happen. So when you are a freelancer, your kind of lifestyle is more as if you're running a business, but the only employee and the only staff you have is yourself. So do you think that there are any tips we could impart really to people about that sort of transition of getting that mindset ready for that kind of leap, if you will, of understanding how if you choose to be a freelancer, how incoming and outgoing will affect you, and how you have to prepare yourself for that?
I mean, that's a topic we could talk about for hours, and it's a simple question with massive answers. So I'll try and give a bit of flavour for this. I think I remember very much. I was in a PAYE world, and I was in an industry, as I say, headed towards business and politics until I changed my career many years ago now. And I remember the daunting fear of going freelance, because it was just nothing I'd ever heard of before. Now, for those of you who may be watching who are either in education or thinking about maybe changing career or direction of career, and there's that awful insecurity which your parents and your friends and family that are mostly PAYE will have this nail biting about them, that, oh dear, you're thinking of going freelance. Well, what about your job security? How do you pay for your mortgage? How do you do X, Y, Z? And I'm sure you can come in on your own personal experiences of this, but that getting over that and having the confidence to understand that there is a living to be made and how to make it is probably the biggest step. Everything else is sort of details of, okay, you do this and this, how you do this step better. But fundamentally, I'd say it's a confidence thing in the beginning to say, what it is you want to do. And the uncomfortable truth is you need to know your worth and know how much better there are people out there better than you, at least in the beginning, so that you're able to solve people's problems for them. And by doing that, you'll deduce your value. And by doing that, you'll know what jobs you can do and to what level you can do them. So a basic headshot or an interview or something like that, is not the same as lighting a feature film set. And you may be able to do one but not the other. And it's being honest with yourself about where you're at and having a business plan in place of how you're going to gain clients, how you're going to retain them, and what relationships you want to build, and leveraging every single contact you have. And really, I wouldn't worry about, people say nepotism. if you've got a potential to have a way into somewhere, you damn well use it, because if you don't, there'll be someone else that does. So getting started is the most difficult part. And notice we haven't talked one iota about your artistic or creative ability, because in the beginning it's got nothing to do with that. It's all about having a business mindset, and it could be, you know, a pencil factory or your own job as a freelancer. You've got to make things add up.
Yeah, good points, good points. I mean, at this point, I'd like to bring in Matt Pothecary, who is an producer director, sorry, and he'll be able to tell us what it's like from the editorial side of the freelance world. I hope. Hello, Matt. How are you?
My best.
Oh, I can't hear you there. There we are. There we are.
I'll do my best, Ian. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. So Matt is a producer director. He's worked in broadcast television all the way to brand funded. He's been a writer, a director, a producer. I'm pretty sure there's not a job that Matt hasn't done from the editorial side. So I'm sure he'll be able to give us some good insight into how to be a freelancer on that side, where he sort of deals at the coalface, if it were, with the more business side of it. So Matt, a few questions. I mean, I'm sure you've heard what myself and John have been talking about. Is there any sort of points you'd like to add? I mean, what was your experience starting out as a freelancer, bearing in mind, I assume that you would have started off as a staff job within a TV company?
Funny enough, I fell into production. I went to Leeds College of Art and Uni and did very sort of creative course there. And I knew that in some capacity, I wanted to get into moving image. And I didn't know what necessarily was going to be the direct way in. I went to Los Angeles to do a music video course, and that was a disaster, albeit I found a short 35mm film to work on, which was incredible. And I sort of came back and again, sort of, we used the word, well, the word nepotism was sort of suggested earlier, but I think it's about kind of riding your luck. My aunt basically hosted shooting of a sort of documentary about a dysfunctional family on a remote Scottish island, and said, do you want to come up and I'll try and get you a job on it? And the production manager at the time reluctantly said yes. And I went up there and I worked my bits off, and at the end of it I was sort of promised a job, you know, if I went to London. So I kind of found myself kind of working freelance from the get-go. I mean, I've been a freelancer since my sort of 17 to 18 year professional life. So have a kind of good idea about the ups and downs and the nuance of it all. That's how I got in, though. Absolutely.
Well, this is probably a good time. If anyone has any questions for any of the people, for John or for Matt, please use the Q&A function down there. We'd love to have some questions. These guys have got a wealth of experience, and they're here to answer anything you want to put at them. So yeah. Well, I've got some questions actually in terms of the difference from my own experience. I mean, as a cameraman, a camera professional, I felt that it was difficult to kind of. I always had to sort of marry up the workload with I had to be able to film things. I had to be able to use the lights. I had to use the equipment. So I had to learn how to use all the things that I had to be a professional at. But I suppose when you're working in a bigger team, because essentially, even though in the camera department we do work as a team, you sort of start out on your own, and then as you get more experience, the team gets bigger. So you move up. It's dependent on where you are. If you're a camera trainee, then you start there, but you are in the team, but you're at the bottom end of the team. Is that similar for when you're a producer or a director? Is that the same sort of freelance journey that you have there as we do, or is it different?
I think no matter where you are on the ladder in terms of your department, there's always somewhere to go. I mean, I took a quite traditional route up from kind of running all the way to sort of, you know, series directing and creative directing and all the rest of it. It's earning the stripes until you're ready to go to the next stage. And I think this is probably true of most cases. It's individuals that you know that will probably give you your next credit. And I think that's early on in my career, I sort of probably worked alongside the same series producer for maybe 2 to 3 to 4 shows on the trot. And then once I had a kind of a better CV, I felt more confident in kind of putting it in front of a new set of people. And more often than not, those sort of new introductions were based on I had experience in a certain area. I've always advocated for, well, a mantra that I've tried to live, you know, by myself, and for kind of younger people that I try and give advice to, is just look for any opportunity to learn new things, whether that's, you know, self-initiated courses, asking silly questions on set, getting your hands on kit. Just that's the only way that you learn, you know. I don't think, I mean, there's film school and there's other kind of much more kind of skill-based courses that set up people for particular jobs. But I think if, you know, I don't really see, I think I probably would be fine had I not gone to uni, given what I've learned and the journey that I've been on. I think it's just about kind of dropping in and learning as much as you can. I mean, I've had jobs in location departments. I've been an art assistant on the way up. I've just tried to do as many different things as possible. And I think that sort of shapes how I look at things and how what makes for a kind of a richer CV in the end as well, actually.
Well, thanks. And we've got our first question. Very exciting. This one I'm going to hand over to John, actually, or for the group, essentially. The question is, how do you go about turning one client into a multiple client? So return business, essentially, when you meet someone you work with, how do you hold on to that client? You've got the first job out of the way. Any answers there? Oh, well, I might try and answer that one. I think, I don't know who actually asked the question. Maybe you can tell me, but I'll carry on anyway. In answer to that question, I think CC Harvard, yes, someone in my ears just told me CC Harvard asked that question. So CC, well, for me personally, I find that having a good work ethic is very important at the beginning when you start any sort of contract or when you get into any relationship with a possible client. And the way to do that is to be very professional, to be on time, make sure you answer all your emails, you're very clear about the job you're going ahead, all the pitfalls that can come up. So you're very clear about the positives and the negatives. So try and, not without being down on things, but just try and keep a straight line and be very clear about what's going on, and try and do the best you can on the job, and also hold your hands up when mistakes happen, because in any industry mistakes will happen, and a lot of the time you find that the pressure to try and be perfect causes these mistakes. So if you can sort of ride those mistakes on the first job, if they do happen, and you're honest and clear, I think you'll find that the client will appreciate that, and they'll know that where you stand, and that level of communication will carry you through, and hopefully will get you another job. I don't know if John or Matt have anything to add to that, but that would be my answer to that question.
Jonathan mentioned this earlier. I think one of the key things, and I'll be honest in something and say that I found out this rather late, is that you both mentioned it. You know, being a good freelancer is about treating yourself as a business. And what I mean by that is understanding your sort of proposition, basically, and what you mean to other people. I've had an awful lot of people recently come to me and go, you know, all my current streams of revenue, the people that I work with are kind of temporarily on pause or not happening. How do I make myself attractive to a new set of people? And I think it's like, what does your shop window look like? What does your website look like? What does your reel look like? How are you making yourself match fit for a new set of people? And I think, you know, in terms of kind of return client, I think it's about delivering. I think it's about understanding their problems rather than just being the guy that films, makes, writes, shoots stuff, directs stuff. I think it's based on personal relationships and really getting under the sort of the bonnet of what's there. You know, I sort of work with a couple of clients at the moment, and half the work is just a lot helping them with stuff that is completely unrelated to what you do. For instance, you know, I helped a client figure out why there was a problem with their Instagram thing the other day, and it's just having that sort of going above and beyond and just being helpful in any way you can. I think that's how you sort of forge long-lasting relationships.
Yeah, a bit like kind of being a multi-tool, essentially. When you hire a freelancer, you're not just hiring a freelancer for that one job. You're actually hiring them for multiple of other things that they might be able to do, but all leading to keeping the production running smoothly. I think is where you're going with that one. We've got another question. I don't know. Again, I don't. Or maybe someone will tell me.
Can I just come in on that last one very shortly?
Yeah. Oh yeah, please go ahead, John. No, next question.
Yeah, on the question regarding what we were just saying, I think, Matt, one of the things you were talking about was the fact that you worked in a CV that allows you to go in many different departments. And whilst we are, as freelancers, especially if we're all related to camera, we would try and specialize in our field and go forward. I think what makes a good freelancer, as you say, is understanding your client's problem and understanding where all the different cogs fit within the whole piece of the puzzle. And if you're able to do that both as an individual, if you're going as more of an individual freelancer going up the camera department route on set, understanding where you fit within that overall production piece and not just sticking within your lane, but trying to help out and make decisions which are good for the whole, not just for you. That's going to really be appreciated long term. And then as a company, if you're talking about more as a video production service, where if you're doing work direct to client, yeah, again, as you said, understand your client's problems and maybe don't just solve those, but also have a chat with them and say, well, where do you want to go and how do you want to be perceived? It's not just, I can make a video for you, but what do you want this to do and why? And where do you see yourself now? What customers do you want to attract and how are you going to do it and what's special about you? All these different things, they require an insight which is slightly beyond any direct remit of any one specific job. So yeah, be open to learning and and I think it comes back to right at the beginning, have loads of experiences.
Well, that's a perfect opportunity, talking of multi-tools and having loads of experience, to bring in our next guest, which is Robert Rinder, who most people might know from television, but I just know to be my local solicitor and or barrister, should I say. Apologies, Rob. How are you today?
Hi, love. Nice to see you all. Can you hear me? Oh dear.
Yes, we can.
Hang on. Oh, that's a happy if I had to book someone for a computer, but also technical. You can't do this on an iPad. It's been really interesting to listen to you because of the common themes between what you guys are doing, making yourself more commercially attractive and building a career at the bar, which most people don't realize. Certainly in the early years, you are your own business. You're all self-employed. You just used to work in communities of white privilege, which is kind of still the same, really. Only persuading people to trust you professionally and why they choose you above others. It's interesting. Yeah. Thank you for having me. Nice to see you all again, by the way. I've worked with, I think, all of you. Various times.
Well, not as a barrister, I hope. As a TV presenter.
No, I mean not with my practice. No. As I say, not unless you're going to commit a random act of genocide. No, so really randomly.
Do you have any advice for freelancers in general, Rob? So in terms of wrapping up your barrister work and your TV work, what advice would you give to other freelancers?
Three things really. Number one, there's this sort of slightly clawing levels of I don't deserve to be in the room. I've been mentoring a bunch of young barristers and actually people that go on to do other things as well. And, we could talk about the underlying social reasons, societal, personal, and, other psychological factors that make people unable to ask for business or feel that they're not necessarily entitled to be in the room. But there are kind of three things, and they're sort of, I suppose, one is commercial and two are what you might loosely describe as sort of features of people's character. The first one is there's this terror around somebody saying no to you. You see it often around people trying to date, and there is a connective tissue between those two things. I mean, the worst thing anybody can ever say when you come up with an idea or you muscle your way forward to suggest that you're just the perfect person for their piece of work or you've got a creative idea is that they could say no. And I think a lot of the time there's a sort of nervousness about asking for the work in the first place. And there's this major practical overthink about what you're going to do and asking for it. And often there's two things that ensue from that. First of all, like I say, that kind of level of effort permeates into the work, and the simple idea that you might have had that would be attractive stops being interesting because it's just, 6 pages when it could be 1 line. And the second thing is that with that amount of work that goes into it, people can sort of feel you being slightly desperate. I said there were 2 things, but I'm a lawyer, so I'll add a third. The other thing is it's not good for your kind of emotional well-being because people over romanticize the work when they're going to get it. And then when that doesn't transpire or materialize, you feel depressed. People are constantly sitting in the chasm between the work that you hope you're going to get and the reality. The second thing is, again, it's about not being afraid of the no, but kind of simplicity. And what I mean by that is that, often I've been in tons of pitch meetings with freelancers, and there are kind of real differences between the sort of smell around the sort of desperation, people who sort of give you the sense that they're desperate for you to do their work, and those who are absolutely imbued, invested in the integrity of the project that they want to make. And those are absolutely, without question, the people that you want to work with. More than anything else, the most attractive freelancers aren't just the ones who are the most skilled. There are plenty of skilled people. It's those who can give certainly the impression of being truly excited and wanting to invest their creative capital into the project, with real authentic enthusiasm, and trying to kind of express that. It can be, sometimes not just attractive, but also impossible, I think, to say no to. And the last thing is, again, a commercial one, is the networking stuff. And I heard what somebody said before, but I don't think we've worked together. And, he is right to an extent. It is a pity. I actually think it's a tragedy and the greatest articulation of the barriers for social mobility that, there are still, especially in London, these instances of shiny-haired examples of nepotism and stuff, where certainly young people get their first jobs in telly because they know auntie this one, who may or may not have been connected to somebody who may or may not have gone to some posh school somewhere. And that is, I think, sort of tragic. And we've seen less social mobility now than we did in the past. But with that big political throat clearing aside, you can't really grumble about not getting work unless you put yourself everywhere in the first place. And it's really hard to do, of course, in lockdown. But, some of the best projects that I've worked on have now been people that have reached out through cold calling, and because, they know someone who knew me randomly through a third party and might just have a good idea, and then they could connect with another production company, etc. I think a lot of the time there's a sense where people ask the question, well, how can I build the network? And the answer is and it does take for some, not for me, because my spinal column doesn't touch my brain and I don't give a monkeys what people think of me. But I think for most other humans that have normal emotional range, it can be really terrifying for you to go and ask for the work in the first place. And part of the networking thing is to, even when work isn't sort of busy, is kind of conversations like this. I mean, I can, off the top of my head, think of 3 or 4 instances. Happened today, actually. I was on the phone to a really serious, well-known broadcaster who also has a podcast, and he was looking for new ideas with his wife, who he works with. And I didn't have anything, but there's this commercial filmmaker who's got this great idea based upon something his wife is doing. I said that this is not for me, but this filmmaker, he only does commercial films. This is perfect for this particular person. And it got off the phone. To less than 3 seconds for me, as I would say in Yiddish, to set that relationship up. And I don't know what's going to come of it. But in the long run, that'll build a relationship. And as part of building that relationship, it's also about maintaining and keeping them. And I have to say, I'm going to call them boys, but, men are especially terrible at this sort of thing. You've got your mates at the pub and that's that. And you very often, especially cameramen, I'm not looking at anyone particularly, but you're just rubbish at sustaining those kind of relationships. You sort of place them in the same box. You've got your friends, you communicate through the medium of football and Neolithic grunt. What more is there to chat about? But actually, sometimes, you have to sort of suffer and keep relationships going. So I'm looking at Matt, Apothecary over there, and her Breton sheet that she's wearing. And I know at the moment that we don't have a kind of a project that we can work on today. But part of the thing is, after we worked together and we liked sort of being in each other's company, there's an ongoing conversation. So we check in once every 3 months, and there'll be an idea that he's got. And again, it might not be for me, but part of the, as I say, point 2 is that you have to really maintain as challenging as and exhausting it is if you've got families and stuff, you have to put the effort into building and sustaining those networks. So I'll give you an example. When I was at the bar, I was by no stretch the most talented. I had a bit of luck where this very influential solicitor spotted me and I got some good work from that. But, you know, every Sunday I'd go out in this cycling group where it turned out loads of the work was divvied up. You know, I'd constantly be doing lectures, finding out, well, what's the new kind of thing that people are interested in, and learn a little bit about money laundering. And, you know, it's tough work. And, you know, it's a type of exhausting work which is difficult, firstly because the payback isn't immediate, also because it's a space in which I think a lot of freelancers feel sort of that inner stomach drop of inauthenticity, right? There's nothing worse than feeling that you've walked away, you know, with your head at someone's bottom who you haven't met in Grindr in the first place. You know what I mean? It's just a horrid.
Sorry to stop your flow. I was going to actually ask you. I was going to ask you actually about people's mental health in terms of that feeling of how do you manage those times when you're not able, when you're not working, essentially, when you're searching for work and you're getting a lot of rejection. How can you set yourself up to be sort of, I don't know, padded from that kind of stuff?
There's so many platitudes, I mean, about this stuff, and it's so difficult. I mean, you know, ultimately it depends where you are in your world. If you've got happiness in your life outside of work, and that's the most important thing to achieve, then of course those sorts of external rejections are going to perhaps wound you less. But you guys are creative. You're already, you know, emotionally permeable in a way that other people perhaps aren't. You know, when you guys have come up with an idea, one of the difficulties is that you see through right to the end of the movie. You've won the BAFTA, you've won the Oscar, you believe in it, right? And that's why, you know, creatives are so difficult to deal with. When someone says no to you, it's not like, well, like, you haven't got the case, Rob, or actually we don't want you to present Ready, Steady, Cook. It's, you know, you've shat on your dream of a vision, an artistic one too, that you've emotionally and creatively invested in. So it's difficult when you guys are creative, and it does, I think, more than in other professions, interfere with people's mental health more powerfully. It's a creative process. Yeah, it's the same way when you make art. Someone says they don't like it. It's like calling someone's child art. It's difficult.
Rob, we've had a question from GTC Harvard, which is how do you deal with big failure?
What's the person from who?
CC
What's
Harvard.
the person's name? Oh, CC, it's a real person. It's not. I feel like I've died woken up in the bar. And
CC Harvard.
It's not going to be one of.
No, it's a real person.
Okay, cool. Okay, good.
CC Harvard. She's asking, what lessons can you take from big failure, and how can you? What was the rest of the question? Sorry, I lost the question. What's the biggest lesson that failure has taught you, and what do you have any tips on being resilient, on resilience?
It's a really good question. You know what? I wish I did. I mean, it depends on. I must emphasize. You know, I see actors and think I know actors really well. I've seen actors who are now global superstars, right? Who throughout their 20s, without naming names, but you don't have to do the most challenging Google search to work out who they are, went through periods of really serious rejection, right? And now they're the sexiest men in the world. And the answer is remembering, I think for me, the critical mantra is two things. One, product of really good therapy over this year, which is that when somebody says no to you, immediately what you're thrust into is the kind of concrete crash mat of catastrophe. And so your amygdala starts firing. You know, I'm ruined. And you go into that space. The first thing is a very immediate one, connecting with your body in a way which isn't sort of silly or, you know, like I've died and woken up and bought a bunch of Palo Santo. I'm talking about that sense where you go, okay, that's interesting. It's not a catastrophe. I will find something else. Being still with the panic that ensues when somebody says no. And it takes a while to come to terms with that and to learn to do that, to get into your body, right? And not to have the homicidal rage. at the same time of looking around and thinking where you are in your career in the parade of untalenteds that are getting work when you're not. That's not going to help you, right? It's not going to help you work out where you are by virtue of assessing where other people are in their careers. It's about the most destructive thing you can do. And secondly, the overwhelming mantra I find is the patience to remember that it's just for now. And we've all had this, right? That idea that we get sunk and asphyxiated by the idea that we're present in an enduring and I think forever problem, a permanent problem. And that's often the case when somebody says, no, you know, that's it, everyone hates me. It's this cascade of self-doubt that you find yourself drowning under. When actually what you realize is a new opportunity will come. You know, you have to be part of it. You have to actively go and do all the things you guys are talking about. But the answer is you feel like shit just for now, today. Next month will be better. And all you need to do is to go back into your life. And it's actually, generally speaking, true of everybody, where you think of a time when things were really challenging. And then a month later, life turned on a dime. You know, I was doing a case where I was very serious, international case. I was so miserable. I mean, you know, not get out of bed miserable, real stuff. And I ended up having a meeting with someone and ended up on telly. Life turned on a dime. And it's true of the, you know, the project that disappears, the one that you want, all of a sudden something will come. And that requires you to have the courage to have patience, I think.
So, Jonathan, have you got any experiences like that you could talk about?
I've got plenty of experiences, plenty of the imposter syndrome, the self-doubt, the idea of failure in many respects. I totally identify with them. It's like you've been making notes of my early career, because you're exactly right. You do have that fear, and you know, business practice aside, there is a confidence there, and I think he's absolutely right to say, you know, when you say your spine doesn't touch your brain, you must not be afraid of just going out there and just welcome the no's. No, because you're one no closer to the yes, and every time you do it, you'll get better at making connections and making relationships, and you'll also get better at finding out what people want and what unique value you have relative to them, and how you can best fill that hole, build that relationship, get the business, retain the business, get a referral, go, you know, so on and so forth. And it really can change on a dime. You know, I've been doing this long enough now that whenever what comes and goes like this as a freelancer, it's never just one flat line. And you learn to ride out the wave. Sometimes there will be some slumps and there's nothing you can do about it. And you just need to have the emotional maturity to know that this will pass. And through, you know, a bit of patience and also positive action, you'll be able to remedy that and things will become good. So, and it often happens just as you really are at your wit's end. You'll get the phone ringing and you'll get the job, and then the next day you'll get asked, are you available for this day? And he says, no, I'm sorry, I've just been booked on the same day. And then you'll be kicking yourself again.
I know. It's like men.
Yeah.
One comes along. So, yeah, it's really true.
I'd like to.
So at this point, I'd like to. Go ahead, Matt. Sorry, I was going to talk over you there.
I was just going to add that I think as freelancers, we're in a sort of particular bubble. We understand the peaks and the troughs. And it's very interesting. All the people that I come across, all my friends, people that I come in contact with work who are not freelance and have no experience of the freelance life, they always say the same thing. How on earth do you do it? And I think wherever possible, you need to sort of remind yourself of and give yourself a pat on the back if you choose to enter this life, because there's a sort of robustness that's required and a thick skin. And I think that, you know, that stuff shouldn't be sort of discounted and remembered as best possible, you know, to get through those constant up and downs. The only other piece of advice that I'd like to say is that get an accountant at the earliest possible stage that you can, just to kind of help you, guide you through those things as well, for sure.
wise.
Right. Well, thanks for Matt, and thank you, Rob. Thanks, John, if you're still there. I don't know, I can't see. And we're welcoming Jude Winstanley. She's a unscripted line producer, if I'm not mistaken. Hello, Jude. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Ian. Hi, Rob. Matt.
Hey, Jude.
You've got some great insights. And I'm going to actually kick off with a question. I actually have a question. This might not be for you. It might have been better for John, but I'm going to ask you anyway, seeing as you're here. So I have a question from Tom Cass discussing how can you move from doing spec work or sort of exposure work into moving into paid work. How would he be able to change his business from sort of doing that job to get seen and get noticed and then moving that into actual an income? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Ask for the money. Just tell them you want to get paid. That it's as simple as that.
Also, there's a CV question for you. Do you have any tips on writing a good CV when you're starting with no experience? And that's a follow-on from that other question.
Okay, so if this is for new entrants for screen industries, from my point of view, two things I'm going to suggest. The first one being, if you are interested in, particularly if you want to work in TV, but also if you want to work in scripted or film, it's a good place to start for the time being. Weirdly, on Facebook, because I know that's where all the old people go, but actually that's where loads of jobs are. So there's a Facebook group called People in TV Runners. It's got a huge community, and it's a big space where you can post your CV. There's loads of advice, loads of feedback. There's loads of discussions going on and jobs, which is super key. And for something that's a little bit more laid out for you with instructions, if you go to tvwatercooler.org, it's an information site run by freelancers for freelancers. And in the top right-hand corner, there's an instructions link, how to write a CV and how to write a cover email. And even though it says TV water cooler, I can guarantee you that those CV formats that we suggest are absolutely applicable if you want to work in film as well.
That's great. Thanks for that, Jude. The link is in the chat for all you people out there. If you want to get more of that information that Jude just kindly imparted to us, the link is in the chat. So, okay. And if you've got any advice on that point?
Sorry, if there's time, I'd like to come in on the question about turning spec work into paid work. My own opinion would be that it's very difficult to do that with the same client, because if you're doing something for spec, for whatever way you arrive at the equation, they are unable to pay, or you're unable to value yourself at this much and command that salary. For whatever reason, that's the way you've ended up with this. But you've seen the value in doing something. The way you convert is, I'd say it's very difficult to win that battle, to then convert that client into a paying client, or at least it's something you need to go to someone else in the same industry, but step up and then get paid work, and then you come back to them and you bring them up to your level that you're now at. And something I did, this goes back to image copyright law and contracts and being flexible and creative. I did something, it was one of these jobs years ago on Facebook. It was pretty low paid for the kit that they were asking for. It was atrocious, but it was very honestly written, and 99% of these jobs don't go anywhere. But this one I could tell was interesting to me, and it was about being on a, filming a charity, jet speedboat race. Those really fast boats, and there's a charity filming a documentary about it. And I had my Movi Pro, and they wanted all the toys for barely anything. And I thought, okay, I'll do it. It's a good experience. It happened to be one of the best days of my life, to be honest. It was so much fun. And given the choice again, I'd probably do it for even less pay or for free, because it was just so fun. But that footage, because there was no contract involved, or it was a contract that I determined, they got their single use license in perpetuity, as is the legal default when there's no contract. And then years later, I know Canon, and I work with Canon a lot. they ring me up and say, we've just seen this footage, actually, do you still have a copy of it? Whose is it? What's the deal? You can now go on Canon Europe EMEA Pro website for their Pro video section, and you'll see that footage and the behind the scenes stills and all that stuff of shooting on Canon, shooting this interesting subject on Canon. And that's, of course, that's a nice financial reward, turning one thing into several things, but it's also a massive marketing and networking opportunity to have that plastered around. And it's only because you know the law, and that was my footage. So when you're working direct to client, that is your stuff to do with, unless there's a specific buyout clause that they've forced you to sign, that is your footage, and you are entitled to use every lever that you have at your disposal to help yourself get ahead.
Oh, that's a great answer. And actually, I think that answers, we had a question about that from Marek, where he was asking, actually, do you feel that you need to do work for less money and then slowly build up? Did we actually, anyone on this panel, work for below minimum wage before we got our big break? And in fact, I might take up on that one for Marek and add at this point that I actually have tried never not ever to do that. If I ever kind of make a decision where I'm going to work for totally no money, which means it's a passion project and I want to be involved in it and I want to see it finished and be something I'm proud of, or I would prefer to get paid properly, because the in-between where you work for sort of just a bit under the rate or not quite the rate kind of ends up in this sort of middle ground where you feel resentful that you're not getting paid properly, but you're still putting the amount of work in. So I'm very much a believer of it's either all in or not at all. I don't know if John has any thoughts on
that. I can totally get where you're coming from. I think for me, given the range of industries and genres that I work in, there's a degree of flexibility. I said in my top 5 tips, be flexible, know what you're worth. And once you're aware of, what value you're giving to someone else, what they're getting from you and what you're able to get from it, may not just be the paycheck. You can then make decisions based on that. And, I have a real problem with people, especially young people that are desperate for work and they're very creative. And people in this industry are disproportionately have a proclivity towards being exploited and not being assertive because it's an artistic field. I have a problem with people not knowing what they're worth and getting exploited, but I don't have a problem with people going in with their eyes open, their heads up to say, okay, you know what, this is a commercial and I'm being paid appropriately. This is something else, but it's interesting to me. And, whether it's, minimum wage or whatever, as long as people are aware, then I think they avoid that resentment, which is basically it's the same result. Don't work and feel resentful. And I think there's just multiple ways to arrive at
that. So I've got a question actually for Rob. And that one was really, how does it sort of translate when you're on the other side of camera in terms of a TV presenter or an actor? Is that are the things we're talking about, do they sort of transpose into that world in the same way in terms of the sort of payment terms and work terms for the project?
Yeah, to a degree. I was very interested. I know, believe it or not, it's a surprise for you, I suspect, but it of course won't be for the other person on this panel. I was able to multitask and watch, do my legal work, and also listen to the legal answers that were being given there. It is important that you understand legal status. I have to tell you, I have dealt with cases, believe it or not, where freelancers have contracts with, frankly, the legal foundation, intellectual and enforceable range of airline salads. I'm actually shocked that people sign them, but it is important you know what you're doing. The question is, it's a really interesting one. I used to defend, as anybody wants to look me up will know, in quite high profile murder cases, used to advise in cases perhaps involving international genocide, certainly matters of international corruption on both sides of the prosecution, but chiefly for the defense. And I've never met a space of more sociopathy, psychopathy, and unpleasantness than I have in television. It absolutely sort of surprises me all the time. Although I suppose I'm used to it. I never thought that having worked for a substantial period of my career in the queuing of Belmarsh would prepare me well for attending high-level TV meetings. Where, as far as I can gather, people really just attend these things in order to divest themselves of the responsibility in the event that things go wrong and co-opt all of the glory in the event that something's a hit. And so one of the challenges, that's a long throat clearing again, to say that what I find is really useful is, you know, trying to conscript people into being honest and not speaking bollocks. And one of the hard parts of being a so-called presenter or whatever is if you've got an idea and somebody's putting it to a commissioner, etc. Three things. Firstly, the layers of government and people that you have to go through before you come to some species of decision maker is harder than dealing with international protocols. And I've dealt with international protocols. Secondly, the amount of bollocksery, which isn't a word but should be, that's involved in this entire process. So, I mean, and the terror that people have in saying, oh, I'm awfully sorry, but the answer's no. So I find that just saying, look, I'd rather not waste your time or mine. So could you just tell me now if there's any point to it? And thirdly, which I suppose is the apotheosis of one or two, closing the deal. And so, you know, being brave enough to say, look, you know, we've been talking about this idea for 6 months. It's time to shit or get off the potty. But it's just a really hard thing to do because, especially in network television, you know, people are so, especially now again, terrified of their jobs and stuff that you just meet. I'm not sure what the collective noun of people who work in commissioning or in creative television, but I suspect it's a malice. This sort of malice of human beings where one person might make a determination and it's really hard to get to the core of the person who actually says yes and then will stay with the project long enough to see it through. I mean, it's just fascinating to me. I mean, it really is. And I have nothing but sympathy for each and every one of you working in this industry where you're perpetually interfacing with people who say false maybes. You know, I come from a world where the answer is yes, no, or guilty or not. And that's what people want. Anyway, that's what I have to say. And to that extent, again, I suppose piggybacking off what I was talking about before, that does interfere in a very serious way with people's emotional chemistry and their mental health. You know, that sort of being strung along. And half the time, I'd say maybe 3/4 of the time, it's just because whoever's on the other end of the telephone is just too terrified to say, no, bugger off, you know, topless dance is a terrible idea. Me, etc. Anyway,
I think
what I think.
That's a good point you made there, Rob, because actually you can have that at both ends, can't you? You can have that from the sort of employer end, but also the employee end, where you can have confidence in yourself and knowing your worth, going back onto what John was saying earlier, being able to turn a job down if the rate's not correct or you do not feel that the production is valuing what you're bringing to the table. So those are really interesting points, actually, that you should be able to. You should be able to,
sure, but I mean, it's a privileged thing to say, but always choose passion over money, right? Sorry to talk over you. Passion over money every time, especially in the creative. It'll pay off in the end, without question. I'm so sure of it. The best work I made and I passionately invested in either the crime series or the Holocaust documentary that I made with the most beautiful filmmaker, who I really love and respect and have learned so much from. You know, if you told me next year that I would earn and again, no one's doing a fun run, but it's, you know, less than I was making at the bar. If they would say I would earn a 1/10 of my income just to be able to work with him, but could cover my mortgage, I'd do it every day of the week because it feeds you without question that more. It's easy to say it's a point of privilege because I don't have kids. But in the creative industry, without question, you know, you chase the delight. And I really feel, and you can see it in certain people's work, that delight and the joy and the investment, you've got to be paid enough to cover your costs, obviously, but that will happily permeate into the work. I'm just sure of it. I'm certain of it. Anyway.
Jonathan, do you have a
good luck to
question?
I'll need all the luck I can take. Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to comment on something that you just said about the the amount of bollocksery that goes on and people being strung along. One of the best things I ever did for my career was get a contract system going. And I know I've said it in the top tip, but I'll explain why. And that's because for those of you who are, thinking of entering the industry or have just entered, as I say, when you're working at the beginning, you're going to be the one, if at all, putting a contract system forward, especially if you're working direct to client, not through a production company. What happens, if you haven't had this happen to you already, it's going to happen. You're going to hear this phrase, "Can I pencil you for this date?" And we all know what that means. And it can be useful, but then it can be a heavy pencil. That's a term I really love. And what it basically means is we'd like to reserve the date, but without actually booking you, so we can cancel at any time. And a booking is either a booking or it's not a booking. And what I say to people, and it doesn't need to be aggressive, people are always scared to bring forward a contract to a potential client, but you don't have to be aggressive with it. You just say to them, yeah, you can pencil me on that date, I am free. But just to let you know, I operate off of a booking form system. It's very simple. It takes about a minute to fill out. And when you're ready to book me, you just let me know and I'll send you a private link. It's links to a hidden part on my website, and you can fill that in. And then you get an email through once it's done that has essentially a signed contract with dates and approximate, details and rate, all that stuff. It's all in there. It's very easy for them to do. And what it allows you to do is it takes such stress off of you, because until that comes through, you can have the mindset that it's not going ahead. It's not going ahead until that thing is signed. And as I say, it takes the emotional toll off you, but also it buys you so much more time because you're not having to worry about things. And also, another thing that contracts do is they sort out the wheat from the chaff, because anyone who would have a problem signing a contract in the first place, alarm bells should start ringing and saying, okay, this is someone who may have a problem, paying on time or at all. And as freelancers, we're always chasing up payments. I still do it now with the contract system, but far less. And overnight, when I made the decision to do that, and I made it through having thousands of pounds of loss of being shafted, it was the best thing. It was the best thing that happened to me, because I went from a position of endlessly chasing people and spending my own time, which is therefore money, chasing payment for work I'd already done, to a position where they would ring me up and say, "We've paid you, by the way. We don't want to get stung by a late payment clause." So, talk to a lawyer. There are plenty of legal templates out there, and you can tailor them to your own needs and what you think is appropriate. But please, please, please look into sorting yourself out and protecting yourself, because not only does it lighten the load and make you more productive, you're going to build better relationships, because the people who are willing to, look you in the eye and sign a contract are the type of people that you'll be wanting to build relationships with further anyway. So it really does speed up the whole process.
Thanks for that, John. Thanks for that. Good insights there. So first of all, let me welcome Faye Watts to the roundtable. Hello, Faye. It's good to see you. You look very smiley, so hello. And I've actually got a question for Jude, because I know Jude's an advocate for people not working for free, and she is also the admin for the Facebook Runners Group, so she knows the most about the people who are just starting out in the industry, and maybe she could give us some insights on what we were just talking about there. John.
In terms of people not being paid, you mean? Sorry, I'm not sure I understood the question.
Yeah, in terms of apologies, it was just a follow-on from the question that I'd asked Bob originally, which was, how do you feel, do you think that people should do some jobs where they're not getting paid to get the work where they will eventually get paid? You feel like that's a way to move up in the industry pecking order?
Well, I think it depends. What is the platform? What is the project? Who is the client? I think certainly for anything in my world, so if it's broadcast television, there is absolutely no reason why you should not be paid, because everything should be funded to some degree. It could be that you're on a development project, which is something the company is doing on spec, or there's a pilot to be made. So there is money, but it might be slightly less than standard rate. And I choose to identify these kinds of things that are not your standard job as an opportunity. So it depends whether you feel like you want to be part of this project, you want to connect with this network of people, you want to work for that particular company, those kinds of things, as to where you want to draw the line as to how much you want to get paid or not. So I'm in a very privileged position that when I'm working, I earn quite good money. So I do choose to do lots of things unpaid with social enterprises, and also giving up my time helping people a lot. In fact, I've got one this afternoon. I'm doing something for a university student to help them with their dissertation. I think it depends what was said before, what your passions are and whether you feel like it's something you want to be involved in or not. As I say, if it's something where you know that there is a broadcaster or there's a record label or there is a brand behind something, there is absolutely no reason why you shouldn't be paid. And in fact, it's likely that they're breaking the law by not paying you.
Earlier, I mentioned that I'm sort of a kind of all in or not at all kind of guy. If I do something for free or spec, I generally will give it my all. But that's, I'll block out. It's essentially a kind of a contract in terms of I will agree to give everything for a fixed amount of time or a fixed job, and then hopefully that will enable that project to be finished. But what I used to find when I was first starting out was that I would agree to do a job, we negotiate about a really low rate, then the job wouldn't get finished, and I may or may not get that really low rate anyway. So in terms of that kind of landscape, do you think there's any sort? Do you think the point I'm making, you should be either all in or all out? Is that a good way to go, or do you think there's a scope to sort of that in between bit of doing low paid work and getting somewhere with that?
Me personally, that's I'm in a position where I've never had to do that. Particularly, I'll set a base rate for what I will do and negotiate how many days a week that might be, how much of my time, exactly like yourself. I don't think I've ever done work on spec for free in order to get a paid job, because I have confidence in my ability, and I feel confident enough to say, look, you're not paying me to do the job, you're paying me for 23 years of experience to be able to guide you in what you need. That's what you're paying for. But I appreciate it can be difficult, especially if you're starting out in a slightly more corporate or branded content environment. And so you want to be able to do some projects in order to be able to show your skills so that you can hopefully attract other clients who do have some budget. So I think there's probably a bit of a compromise to be made, like Jonathan was talking about.
And do you have any top tips for people who are just becoming freelancers now? Any sort of top advice for people just starting out in the industry that you can impart with us? Maybe even impart, because I could do with some tips.
Actually, I'm just writing something for a university. I'm doing a talk for them tomorrow about such things. So there's a few things that you can do. I think the first thing is to actually tell people that you're looking for work. I think sometimes people forget and they assume that someone will contact them when they've got a job for them. But quite often, if you haven't spoken to people for a little while, it's a bit out of sight, out of mind. And if you don't tell people you're looking for work, they just assume that you have work. So it took me quite a long time to realize that when I was running, that actually I have to tell people when I'm available or if I'm looking for something. So I think communicating that you're available is really helpful. It's really annoying with COVID because you can't sort of meet people you haven't seen for a little while just for a coffee or for lunch or something and sort of rekindle kind of professional relationships. I find that very annoying at the moment. I think as a freelancer, you have to be organized, or you have to have a partnership with somebody else who is organized. Usually for us, that ends up being your spouse, who might do all your, I'm quite used to booking, particularly camera people. I'm quite used to booking camera and sound people, and then negotiations to some degree, and certainly invoicing come in via somebody else who might be their partner. That's quite normal. If it's not your bag, if admin isn't your bag, that's okay. We're creative people. You can't be great at everything. So I think we all kind of make allowances if people are not great at business skills, and like maybe they forget to do the contracts returns, and that means I keep having to go, you need to send the contract back for me to be able to pay you, because I need the contract back to be able to deliver the program. So that happens quite a lot. I'd say networking. So the networking thing, I'd say being organized. I think something that freelancers forget a lot is about self development, skills development. And particularly in our industries, we technology and processes move on very, very quickly. And I think a lot of the time people, especially when you're busy, and as a freelancer, you don't have a boss that's saying, I'm putting you on this course to learn how to do this, or how to develop your soft skills with managing people, or I don't know, how to learn this particular new development of legal stuff that's happened within our industry. I think that sort of, and when you're busy, it's really, really difficult to do that. And I think it's important that you, for yourself and for your employability, but also for the people that you're working with as well, that you make sure that you're keeping up to date with stuff. So for instance, if anyone has not done the coronavirus basic awareness on production free course, which is on Screen Skills, takes about an hour, you should probably do that right now, because if you haven't been working and you're about to get work as the sunshines come back, it's one of those things that all productions pretty much are asking people to complete. So you have at least basic awareness of how to keep everybody safe on set. So yeah, that's probably enough things in me talking now.
Great tips, dude. They were very useful, even for myself. So thank you for that. And now I'm going to move on to Faye. Hello, Faye. Sorry we left you in the corner there for so long. I don't know. Going back to actually something that Jude was talking about, financials and getting her spouse to help her with hers. I mean, I assume you would be the sort of person that someone like me would call when they had a pile of receipts and invoices that need to be sent.
Work when I was in my teens, early. Is my sound bad? Let me try again.
Yeah, if you can start going from the top.
Yeah, so hopefully you can hear me now. Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. I've been a freelancer and I know what it feels like. When I was in my teens, early 20s, I was freelancing for many years. And that's how I ended up in accountancy and in tax. Struggling with numbers. I came from a creative background, bit of acting. I was a rubbish actor. So I have decided to do something else. And I ended up fumbling into tax. But the one thing that I find creatives say a lot of the time is that I'm rubbish at numbers, or I'm really not good at my finances, or I'm not good at maths. And I hear that kind of social conditioning coming through all the time, where people are repeating that same message. So they're almost already putting a block on themselves. And then, as you say, they either go, well, I'm scared of this box of receipts, so I'm going to pile it up and deal with it at the end of the year. And then they put off invoicing and put off things like that. Or, of course, the best way to deal with things is deal with it and get on with it. Have a bookkeeping system in place where you can, process your receipts as you go. So you're not putting it off, and you're not treating it like the green-eyed or the monster, or the chimp on your shoulder. And you're acting like a business owner instead of somebody who's terrified of the finances. So that's what I'd add to that.
Well, and if I was just starting out as a freelancer, are there any key things I should know or I should be aware of? Because obviously when I started out back when we were still chiseling tablets, but now it's moved on, it's all digital. Is there any advice you can have for our next generation of freelancers?
Yeah, there's a lot to decide right now. I mean, there are a lot of rules and regulations, but one of the big decisions that most people starting out are making are, should I be self-employed or should I be a limited company? And that's probably one of the bigger questions. And that's because there's lots of legal statuses, there's lots of different reasons, commercial, tax, and sort of the corporate protection you get of being in a limited company. So that's probably the first question. For anyone just starting out, the simple solution is to start as a sole trader and get yourself registered as a self-employed person, and then you simply do that with HMRC, and then you're ready to rock and roll. So I would say that's the starting point. The second point to do would be to get yourself a bookkeeping software. Use something like QuickBooks or Xero. They are made for freelancers. They are brilliant pieces of software. You can get them on your phone. You can scan your receipts through apps like Receipt Bank, which is now known as Dext. These are sort of digital tools that you can get that stop it feeling like a bookkeeping process and become part of the day-to-day routine of your business.
And a lot of
Can I just add something off the back of that?
Oh yeah, please go ahead, Jude.
Sorry, just off the back of that point just there, for broadcast TV and for film, which is separate if you're doing kind of commercials, I believe, or branded content or corporates, actually, if you're starting right at the bottom, so if you're starting out as a camera trainee or a camera assistant, I'm saying cameras because cameras today, but in any of those other more entry-level roles, HMRC, we actually have a very special set of tax rules, and HMRC are really, really arsey about who is allowed to be self-employed or not. So you can register for self-assessment, which is a bit different. I'm not a tax expert, by the way, but I know that a lot of people get a bit confused because as a camera assistant, they will try to invoice for a TV show, and actually we're not allowed to accept it because they're not providing a huge amount of equipment and they may not have a special letter. So I will let, there are probably other resources that I'm sure the GTC provide links to, which you can see more about that because it's quite boring. It's about tax. But don't freak out and feel like you have to do all this stuff with HMRC right now because you might not actually be able to.
So, Jude, I think you're talking about a Lorimer letter or an LP1,
yeah.
I think.
LP10, yeah.
It is,
sort of
it is, but it's called a special letter.
Yeah.
No, it is officially called a special letter. It's weird.
It's known as three things: the Lorimer letter, the LP10, or the special letter, as it's otherwise known. Yeah. And the Lorimer letter is because it's based off of some case law around the Lorimer case.
I assume that probably doesn't affect anyone who is new to the industry in terms of a Lorimer letter. That's when you're a bit further down the line, isn't it?
It depends on what you're going to be doing in your work. But I mean, yeah, if you're brand new and you're perhaps, it depends on the job and the role that you're taking on. For most people, if they're going into self-employment and they're genuinely going to be doing ad hoc work, they're going to be going from a different shoot to a different production, they're moving around, then they are most likely genuinely self-employed. Sorry, I'm a hand mover, my hands are going everywhere. They're genuinely self-employed. Now, they would apply for this LP10 letter if it's a requirement for who they're working for to demonstrate that they're employed, and it gives they're self-employed, it's now the rules of IR35 are coming in from April 2021 are going to potentially change the way the LP10 letters are treated. But I think as a starting point of somebody starting out, registering for self-assessment, registering for self-employment is the first start. And what that does is it gives you a 10-digit reference number that becomes your unique tax reference number. And that's what you use to file your taxes. And then every single contract you do from there will be dependent on the circumstances of the contract, will depend on how it's treated for tax purposes. So, and it will also depend very much on exactly what you're doing within that role.
Whew, that sounds like a lot of stuff to know. And that actually now brings another question I have for you, Faye, about being organised. Now, how do you I know we've already talked about invoicing and QuickBooks and so on and so forth, but what about the other pitfalls of being a freelancer in terms of, we've talked about HLRC, we've talked about the LP10 letter. I mean, if I was starting out now, it would be totally blowing my mind. How can I go about being organized? Like, is there any tips you have for the sort of way you could approach this sort of side of your sole trader business?
Yeah, definitely. So the couple of software, I mean, there's so many software providers out there, and I think it's embracing cloud technology from day one. So yes, as a business owner, you need to become a finance director. You need to become the IT director when your computer breaks down. You need to be the marketing director because you're going to be the one that goes out there to get the work. But your role as the finance director is to keep all your paperwork in track. Now you can put it in a shoebox if that works for you, but ideally get yourself a cloud accounting app. There's ones like Xero, QuickBooks, Free Agent is really good for those starting out. They're all at a price, they've all got a cost, but there are some free ones that are perhaps not so good. And start using those from day one. You can create your invoices, you can capture your expenses, you can match it, download your bank transactions as you progress, but it's a really good habit to get into from day one if you're starting out invoicing. And it would just get you used to things as you grow as a business, and it'll become more autonomous. It becomes something natural that you do all the time.
Just something else I just want to just add in there.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. There's a bit of delay talking over each other. Just to add in on that, there is a decision when you start out to, whether you want to go, as you say, as a sole trader, or whether you want to set up as a limited company. And usually, though, you have to consider what extra returns you're going to have to do. If you're going to have to do company account returns, or whether you're going to have to do VAT returns for yourself. And once you start earning above, what is it now, 75,000, or you
80,
have to,
85.
85. Your VAT it's mandatory anyway. You must be VAT registered, but you'll probably want to do it earlier because you can claim back the VAT on kit purchases or whatever it is you want to do. So it is worth it, but you have to be really hot on your accounts. You have to submit them quarterly, and there's no getting around it. So as much as what we say, we can work around not wanting to do admin, you've got to make sure you've got that in place. And if you don't have it within yourself or within your partner or immediate network, absolutely it's worth investing in an accountant, because there's just no way around that. You can get yourself into some really hot water just without even knowing.
Yeah. And we have so many clients. Oh, come.
Sorry, it's my delay. It's a bit of a delay. I was going to go with little and often. I always find work. So if you do your receipts at the end of every month, it's a lot easier than trying to do it all on the 29th of January, in my experience.
Yeah. There's a really nice app actually called OneTap. It's like the baby brother of something called Receipt Bank, which is owned by Dext. You can download it for free as an app, and you can capture your receipts while you're on the go. So if you've just got an iPhone or an Android, I think it's fine. You just capture your receipts, it records the data, and it's pulling it into your phone. So no more hanging on to bits of paper that are going to fade in the sun, no more losing them in your wallet, bottom of your handbag. It means you can sort of snap as you go. So even more than doing it once a month, you're doing it every day, every time you've got an expense, or at least once a week, so you get on top of it. So it is a commitment to get started and get familiar, but once you get used to it, it just becomes part of your routine like anything else. So yeah. Oh, and just another thing to add actually about the VAT threshold. There's always somebody's friend down the pub that tells somebody to register for VAT early because they say it's great, you can claim back loads of VAT. And one of the downsides, in our opinion, it can be really bad advice because people can, exactly as John was saying, people get caught out and they don't do their VAT returns on time. Then they get penalties, all to save a couple of £100 in VAT. It then ends up costing them more money engaging an accountant to fix it. And they've got an unnecessary VAT burden every quarter that they didn't want when they're out there trying to get work. So don't always listen to your friend down the pub, and take proper advice before you become VAT registered.
Which is a perfect time for me to bring in Orang Ramani, who is an independent financial advisor. So that segues quite nicely. I'm pleased with that. Oh, and he's got a very good poster in the back. Oh, okay. Orang, how are you today? I can't actually hear you. Orang, I think you're muted at your end. We're having some technical difficulties at the moment. All right, we'll have to come back to you in a second, Orang, and we'll come back to you. We've got some people sorting it out in the background, technical people. So, Faye, yes, moving on from that, independent financial advice. We have some above us, but we can't hear him. And I wonder what he would tell us to do. Probably something about setting up some kind of dividend system where you pay yourself and make sure that once you're doing that, that you're saving as well, because that's quite a big thing about being a freelancer. You need to save for a rainy day for those big expenses that you don't know around the corner.
Yeah. I have one accounting tip for anyone who's looking after their money is to go through your bank statements and all your expenses and itemize it into 3 columns: essential, necessary, and nice to have. It's the nice to have that's a real wake-up call as to how many extra things you're spending your money on. The necessary and essential are a little bit subjective there, because for some, they would deem whatever's necessary as being essential, and for some who deem essential, that might be a nice to have. But it's a really good exercise to do, because it will really get you thinking about how much extra money you've got, and more importantly, how much money you need to make in order to just meet your essential bills. And that's normally a big wake up call for many people. And they think, well, I've got to get out there, because it's lovely to work for free. We've all done it. We've all worked for free before, and I still do all the time if I feel that it's a passion project and it's something I want to do. But I ultimately always remember how much I need to earn to get those necessary and essential bills paid. So.
I understand that. I haven't had a haircut for over 15 years. Not essential. But I haven't rang back yet. So, Jonathan, I don't know. Have you got any advice about squirreling away some cash for those sort of any bits of kit that you need to buy?
Yeah, it's an interesting one as to which way you go. And I'm currently set up as a sole trader by myself, but there is a point where I think I may set up a limited company. And this is not too much as a startup tip, but when you set up a company, you can have what's known as a director's loan, and your kit can go into the company as a director's loan and is therefore deductible against the profits that company would make. And obviously you can't do it all the time. It's just whatever the value of that kit that you've put in goes into. But it's playing the company game is a very different experience to playing the sole trader game, which is very different to being PAYE, because we judge our financial success as PAYE as just the money that's coming into your account once it's been taxed. And then but on the company side, really, you want to, obviously everything has to be completely legally above board, but you want you want to declare every possible expense that is legitimate to be put towards your expenses, and then so you're paying the least amount of tax. And that's perfectly legal and smart way to manage your finances, but it's just a very different way of operating of directors' loans and then directors' dividends, and you wouldn't measure your own success by how much you have in your own personal bank account once you start going sole trader and then later on into companies.
And actually, this might be a question for. Oh, we've got Orang back. Orang, financial advisor. Here he is. Welcome.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry about that. There was some technical issues there. Nice to be with you all. Thanks for having me. So, what do you? I mean,
ask you. I was just going to ask you if you had any advice in terms of how to sort of keep your sole trader or freelance business going in terms of squirreling away cash for a rainy day. Do you have any advice on that in terms of how you could set yourself up when you begin so that you're never sort of looking like closing down before you've begun, really?
I think it's a good question. I sort of defer to what Faye was talking about separating your business from anything else. So, you know, a lot of people when they first start out on this self-employed journey or freelance journey, struggle with that concept that you know, suddenly their personal bank account is where they pay for their coffee in the morning, but also where their invoices come from. So it's a really simple thing, but to just have a separate bank account for all of your business expenses and your business income just makes your life a lot easier to manage in regards to money. That's a really simple thing that anyone can do. That just would add a lot of value, I think, when you come to do your accounts at the end of the month or year or whenever it is that you choose to do it. The other thing that's a sort of 101 when it comes to this stuff is just working to a budget. You know, really get to grips with what you need to live on and what your minimum sort of income needs to be to cover off your outgoings. It's sort of, it's complicated by the fact that when you're a freelancer, you earn everything gross. Whereas when you're an employee, you just get your paycheck and you just spend that. You know, there's considerations that have to be made around putting money aside every month and being quite organized about that. So yeah, it's definitely worth speaking to an advisor like Faye very early on, just to get a handle for how you're going to structure yourself, whether that's sole trader or limited company or and all that kind of thing. And then once you've done that, to create a separate bank account and use a budget. Those are my sort of 3 golden tips, I'd say, if you're just starting out.
And so what do you specialize in exactly in terms of your financial background? How does your advice or knowledge, how would you be able to help a freelancer?
Yeah, so thank you, Ian, for the opportunity to give me a bit of a sales pitch here. Yeah, what I tend to do is work with private clients, so individuals, whether they're company directors or sole traders, to advise them on how to manage their money in relation to obtaining mortgages, in terms of ensuring that if they can't work, they've got some sort of income protection or some backup. Those are sorts of things that you lose when you go, you know, self-employed versus being an employee. There's no such thing as sick pay. You know, you're left to the statutory minimums, which are basically nothing. So I work with people to determine what they need in relation to that. I help them plan with relation to their pensions. You know, there's no employer pensions or employee and employer contributions like you'd have if you were an employee. So you need to make that provision yourself, and knowing how much to save and how to do it can be quite complicated. So, you know, it's a bit of planning work around that I work with a lot of my clients on.
And I'm fairly sure that one of the big questions will be pension provision for freelancers. It's something I wrestled with when I first started out. And do you have any advice about, is that something, as soon as you start becoming a freelancer, you should try and get your head around in terms of, because as you had already said, there is no sick pay and there is no benefit capture really, apart from statutory NI. So what would you do as a freelancer? How do you just have to save even more out of that bill or that invoice into your pension? Is that the way you would go about that, or are there other ways?
Yeah, I think it all comes back to this concept of budgeting, doesn't it? You know, you need to allow for a certain amount of cash in each pot for each sort of thing. You know, you've got your day-to-day living expenses, you've got your expenses in terms of running your business, and then you need to make provision for the day that you don't want to be working so hard. And that means a proportion of your income has to go into a separate pot. A separate pot needs to be created for the tax man, because that's paid often in arrears and you need to plan for that. So you need to save for it. Otherwise, you're going to get a nasty shock when you get your first bill, which doesn't often come until about 18 months after you've started. So that's quite confusing for a lot of people. They think, oh, this is great. I'm earning, I'm not paying anyone any tax. But it will come and you need to be prepared for it. So pension's just another pot really that you need to save towards. And obviously I can advise on how much to save, what that will result in when you eventually do want to slow down and not work so hard. So sort of a bit of modeling and forecasting, if you like, and how it's invested and, you know, what kind of risk approach you take and all of those kind of technical financial advisory pieces I can pick up on, basically. Yeah.
So we've had a question actually from Llewellyn, who says that he adds back to his invoices because he feels it adds gravitas and it makes it easier when you're working with big corporations because they feel you're already known by HMRC, so they might do less checks on you. I'm not sure if it's a question or a comment really, but I'll hand this one over to Faye. What do you think about that? Is that something as a freelancer, I'd maybe supercharge that because it'll be easier?
I don't think anyone nowadays would engage with you or employ you just because you're VAT registered. People employ you because you're you, because of the service you bring to the table, and then probably more worried about your insurance as to whether you're VAT registered. Have you got your equipment? There's loads of other questions I think they'd be more concerned about rather than if you're VAT registered. Does it make? I think that's quite an old-fashioned myth in a way, that being VAT registered makes you look like you're a bigger or more professional business. The VAT threshold is 85,000. It does perhaps imply that you've got bigger clients, that you are obviously turning over 85,000, but I wouldn't let that cloud your judgment generally as to whether that makes you look good on paper or more sort of registered with HMRC. I've really never come across that being an issue.
I hope that answers your question, Llewellyn. What are your thoughts on that, Orang? Would that affect? Does that come into your world? Do you find that a lot of your clients ask you about that and the way they have to operate around it? Because you can make a profit on the VAT, like collecting for the government, for HMRC, right? A certain percentage.
I'm definitely no VAT expert. I leave any VAT question. I defer to my knowledgeable colleague Faye on that. All I can say is this thing about image and about your own belief in your own ability, because this was kind of touched on in the first half of this roundtable. I think when it goes back to this thing. I mean, I'm self-employed. I guess I started out as a sole trader. Now I run a limited company. So I've had a bit of experience of how that felt back in 2003 when I first started. And it's quite daunting, isn't it? Because, you go from having support, having an infrastructure, having marketing team, a sales team, maybe, and suddenly you're everything and everyone. So it comes back to this thing of really understanding what your value proposition is and putting a value on that and really being able to articulate it well. Whenever you're asked, you receive a sort of request for a proposal or a tender or whatever. And I think, this question about having a VAT number on your invoice, I don't think that really means anything in this day and age. It's more, what's your social presence like in terms of if someone Googles you and looks you up? What does your catalog look like? What are your other clients saying about you? I think that's just a feature of being in business in this era, so the kind of things that I do in my business is I set up a sort of, a profile on an independent site where people can leave reviews about me as a financial advisor, so that other people that could be potential clients can see. So I'm sure there's something similar. It's not the same industry, but there must be something similar that you can do in terms of building up that sort of trusted testimonial kind of back book that you can show any prospects. That kind of stuff I think goes a lot further.
I've got a question for you, really for my own benefit more than anyone else's, to be honest. How much should I be setting aside for my pension, out of percentage-wise, out of my earnings? Do you think? I'm trying to get some free advice.
That's a great sort of basic question, basic financial planning question, and the financial advisor sort of finger in the air rule of thumb is that you should probably, I remember the guy that first set up my pension told me this: take your age, divide it by 2, and that's the percentage of your income that you should be putting aside. So if you're 40 and that's when you start, you should be putting 20% aside. If you start when you're younger, you can put in less because of the effective growth of that investment over time. So the trick is to start as early as possible and to manage it, and that applies to whether you're a freelancer or an employee. You've got to. None of us probably make enough of an adequate provision, or a lot of us don't anyway, in terms of pension. And speak to an advisor, speak to someone and ask them for your specific circumstances and what your goals are, what you should be doing. But if you use that rule of thumb, you won't go far wrong.
Well, I've got one, Jude. So do you find that people who come to work with you in terms of, I suppose you do longer contracts being a line producer. So someone will come with you and you'll probably hire them for a 3-month period or a 2-month period, depending on how long the stint is. Are these things that you would discuss with them? Would this come up in their contract, or do you expect them just to sort of have this all squared away? They turn up for work with an LP10 letter and they're ready to go.
Well, for the kind of stuff that I do, because I do unscripted. So for the most part, the kind of things that I do might be kind of studio based. They'll be kind of factual. So to be honest, my crew tend to be dailies, although I might have them for, they work on a daily basis over a period of time. For some people, that will mean that they are eligible for the pension. And something that you will find, because all employers have to have the pensions now, is that you're generally kind of opted in after the 3-month period, unless you tell them not to. However, what I wasn't aware of until quite recently was that you can ask to be opted in as soon as you start. So if you're actually going to be eligible to receive it, and that depends on how much money we're actually paying you as to whether you hit the threshold, I believe, you can actually ask for it a bit sooner, which has kind of certainly made me think about the kind of work that I do and under a limited company, and whether I would consider going back to being Schedule D, because actually it might benefit me better for what I do. Generally what happens is your production manager or line producer, if you're working on something in TV or film, will send you like an onboarding process, and that'll have a start form that you need to fill out that's got personal data that we're collecting from you in order to make a contract to go into the unit list, for any other documentation we might need to give you. We're going to need things like we need to collect evidence of your right to work for HMRC, so we need to see your passport, ideally in person, but usually that's highly impractical. So we just take a scan of that. Then it could be that it depends what the production company is. They may tell you that you're eligible for pension, and you might get some details about that. And that's for each individual to make a decision as to whether they feel that they can release some of their salary in order for the company to also put in a percentage. Most people would say it's free money. Why wouldn't you do that? However, I do appreciate that other people might feel like they can't actually afford to give up that percentage of cash at that particular time. It was just about pensions, right? Was it other stuff? Do we have a chat about it in general? Not really. Usually I'm just badgering people going, hello, here is your contract. Please send me your invoice and your LP10. And also I need your passport and your start form. And you need to sign this coronavirus thing to say that you're not sick and you're not going to infect people. And you also need to tell me, like if you're working with children, that you have not been, that you have to fill out a safeguarding form to say that you appreciate you will not be left in the room with a child by yourself, as much for your protection as theirs. There's a whole bunch of things depending on what kind of show you're making, that you have to do all this extra admin stuff, as opposed to being a staff person at a company. But generally that won't be working frontline production. There might be slightly more corporate, or working in post-production, or working at branded content, something like that, where you just get given a creative project to work on. You don't have to do all this extra stuff.
Fantastic. That was all pretty clear. I feel like I've learned a lot there. So thank you very much. Right, well, I'd like to thank all of our guests. Thank you all for joining me today and letting me host. I hope I wasn't too terrible. It's my first time, so get on with me. And in summary, I think we talked about diversifying your client base is a key thing. I think we should all think about that. It's very important if you're going to become a freelancer. Engaging with other freelancers is key and very important, so you can build a tribe, a network of people you can work with, you can get advice from, you can ask for favors, things like that are going to help you, support you on your journey. And these guys are now my support group. I think I'll be giving Owen a call later with financial advice. And physical and mental health. This is a key thing in our industry. There will be a lot of times where you won't be working, and there will be some times where you'll be really busy. And it's managing your own health to make sure that you can ride those waves and make it through, because great highs and great lows can be very intense. So, make sure that your mental health is key. And I'd just like to thank the community and thank everyone for having me today. And on behalf of the GTC, thank you all for tuning in. And I hope you enjoyed it and found it informative. I think there will be some links in our box below for the things that I guess spoke about, and there will be follow-up on the website, I believe. And so, yeah, thank you for listening to it. And I'd like to thank our guests again. Thank you, Faye. Thank you, Jude. Thank you, Oran. Thank you, Matt Hoffrey, Rob Rinder, and Jonathan Constantine, who is gone. Thank you all, and thanks for sharing the roundtable with me.
Thank you.